The last keynote is the perfect match to close this amazing Codemotion. It reveals all the aspects a developer needs to have a real impact as IT professional. So no more words, and give a big round of applause for Luca.
Hello. So thanks for coming. This is the closure keynote. I hope you will enjoy. I'm going to talk about impact today. So have you ever thought, how would you visually represent your life? I know it sounds a silly question, but in reality it's not. And sometimes in my spare time, I really think about it. I start to think about shapes, I start to think about what happened. But at the end, I always go back with a line. Precisely a timeline, because each of us knows more or less how we start our life. We know how it begins. We also know already how it's going to end. But the reality is, each of us is enjoying the journey. A journey that is composed by moments. I used to call them pivotal moments. The classic thing that change completely your life. The way how you think about people, the way how you think about relationships, the way how you think about work. And the reality is, during those pivotal moments, there are something that is specifically the path of your life that is changing. There is a different trajectory. I'm pretty sure that each of you can potentially tell me one of these epiphanies. I like to call them in that way. And those epiphanies are so specific that are changing completely the way how we interact with people, how we change our career and so on. You know, I'm very lucky. I feel very lucky because I have the opportunity to speak with a lot of great minds around the world. I had the opportunity to travel the world doing what I really like. And today I decided to share with you 3 stories, because in reality, I could potentially go straight to the outcome, but I think it's not really what you are looking for. I think you want to hear how the things evolved and why we arrived to that outcome, because just sharing an outcome is not really enough. Those stories are not fantasy, are real life, are something that happened really and I experienced in my life. So, my name is Luca Mezzalira. I'm Vice President of Architecture at DAZN. I'm a Google developer expert on web technologies, and I'm the London JavaScript Community Manager. I hope that you are ready for this journey, because I totally am. So the first story is called Reinventing Yourself. And the protagonist of this story, in this case, is Alex. Alex is a seasoned developer. Actually, he's a freelance. And he works in several companies around Europe. And it's absolutely amazing how well-known is Alex in the industry. I remember that I met Alex several years ago in a community event where we were sharing the same passion. Yeah, I know. A lot of you probably would laugh now that there is the Flash logo on the screen, but the reality is Flash wasn't that bad. Flash was a great technology used in the wrong way sometimes. Anyway, Alex and I were used to talk about Flash platform in the past. I remember in 2010, 2011, where there was a huge hype around Flash, and I was working on an embedded system with Flash. And it was quite complicated, honestly. And he was working instead on rich internet applications, how we're calling back in the days. Now are just web apps, right? And in the evening, we had those remote chats where we were sharing our passion, what we had learned, and our hope for the Flash platform. Alex was really, really mastering the domain. He really mastered the Flash platform. He knew upside down how it was working. He knew how the garbage collector works. He knew the best practices, all the architecture out there, the different frameworks that were available. And he really mastered that technology. Although in 2012, something happened. If you're not familiar with that, Steve Jobs shared in a public letter his thought about the Flash platform, definitely destroying the platform. And Adobe at the time that was owning the technology didn't push back. They just moved on and embraced HTML5. And it was the right move for them. But obviously, if you think about that, Alex, as many other millions of Flash developers at that time, he was struggling to find a new contract because no one was asking anymore about that specific technology. And it was very respected and well-known in that industry. So Alex has a really tough moment. On top of that, we are talking about 2012, where there was the fade out of the Great Recession. And it was already hard to find a job. Now, with the change of skill set, with the Great Recession, it was even harder for him. The other thing that it wasn't clear, and specifically on the front-end world, is the fact that there wasn't a front-runner technology. There wasn't an alternative, a clear alternative to Flash. So there were companies that were investing in Unity. There were companies that were invested in web standards. There were companies that were investing in other technologies like Lua and the Hex that I recall. And slowly but steady, we finally found a front runner. And JavaScript got definitely traction. We started to see it on the web. We started to see that on the backend. It was basically everywhere. But for Alex, it was far to be an easy job because he has to move from a paradigm to another language that was completely different. And before jumping straight to JavaScript, he decided to go ahead and take one of the contracts that he felt more interesting. It was developing some games. And the technology that were made was Lua. Lua, obviously, it was slightly different from Flash. And Alex, I remember, it was quite funny because when we were calling, I was still working with Flash. He was working with Lua and he was telling me, you know what, it's really hard because it's completely different. The paradigm is different, and the expectations are different, implementation are different. And I remember his frustration quite well in my mind. And then suddenly JavaScript took over. And Alex, again, found himself in a transition. It wasn't just moving from, let's say, one technology to another, but it was even more. And he's freelance, remember that. So in order to be on top of everything, he really went back to study and invest his time. So Alex, the second time, moving from Lua to JavaScript, did something completely different. He didn't approach like always working straight to the syntax and work on the programming language. He worked differently this time. He started to focus himself on patterns and algorithms, architecture, and he started to see similitudes between Flash, between Lua, between JavaScript, and immediately in his brain, a lot of dots start to connect. And that was just wonderful because he was starting to write, focusing on what he has in mind, what he has to express, and not focusing on the syntax. He eventually realized at the end that a language, a programming language, is just a way to express yourself. It's not, let's say, a mantra. It's not the way for living. And yes, we definitely need to understand the syntax, but it's not the most important thing. The most important thing in that case for Alex was learning patterns, understanding the patterns, how to apply again what are the best practices and best patterns and architecture for a language, and then apply that. And Alex successfully started to create blog posts, doing talks, and started really to work hard for the community, sharing his thought. And the most amazing thing of that, the give back that he did for the community was great, and so great that people started to comment his blog post, as people started to interact with him and suggesting, you know, Alex, probably you need to change this thing. And I remember clearly in a call that he was telling me that he was over the moon because really smashed it. He really found that abstracting some concept would keep him up to date, because now when he focuses on learning functional programming, learning reactive programming, learning best practices like design patterns architecture, those are changing not that often. Programming languages are. Frameworks are. Today there is a framework, tomorrow there won't be. And Alex understood that, and it was a great sharing that changed completely the way how I'm thinking about our job. The second story is called The Context. And for this story, we have another protagonist. She's called Emma. Emma is a good friend of mine, and she lives outside London. I live in London as well. And she's mother of 3 children. We never worked together, but we were introduced by a common friend. Emma is a solution architect. She's very experienced. She has over 10 years of experience as solution architect. And the interesting thing is Emma is been a while that is in the company where she is. And she knows deeply how the company works. She knows deeply what are the key things that she has to bear in mind when she's working in this company. So suddenly, one day, we were out for a coffee, and she was super excited because in this company, she finally had the possibility to work on something new. She was the porting of a legacy software in a new state, and she can start from scratch. And usually, in her company, it didn't happen that often. So it was a pretty rare opportunity, so she was very excited about that. And I remember clearly that usually, and this is a classic pattern that I see in people, when, particularly in architects, when they start this journey, for a greenfield project, you start to gather together all the mistakes that you have done in the previous projects. And you put together a list of things that you don't want to do. And then slowly but steady, you tend to start very precisely to apply all the findings and learnings from the past. So what Emma did is starting to work with this distributed team on gathering requirements, understanding deeply what was not working in the legacy software. Because when you have to replace, you need to understand why you're replacing. It's not just a technical challenge, it's a business challenge as well. You want to make better something that is already there. And therefore, she spent a month, if I remember well, working on this project. And she really gathered a lot of information. And she started the design of the architecture. She didn't stop there. She created also some principles around the architecture that the developer should follow. I remember that Emma has an interesting style of being an architect. She doesn't like ivory towers. She prefers to be involved with the people. And honestly, I stole that insight from her. And it's just great, because you really are in the trenches with developers, and you can understand what's going on and why. So Emma gathered all the developers' teams. It was a distributed team, so imagine how difficult it could be. And she was explaining all the thought. And at that stage, the architecture was just a draft. And slowly but steady, she was evolving with the contribution of the team. There was one thing that was controversial. Emma created, let's say, a principle that was duplication over abstraction. And if you think about that, it's quite controversial. Developers really didn't like that idea. But Emma, she's a seasoned architect, as I said at the beginning. She knows about the dry principle, and it's not something new. But at the same time, she knows about the context where she was operating. She has a distributed team with different time zones that they have to work on the same code base, and having a team that is centralized, that is doing all the changes on a code, it could take days before you unblock an external dependency for another team. So she found inside the project some areas where code duplication were applicable and over abstraction. And that was just a great way to speed up the development. And yes, going against some rules, but it was intentional. So she understands the rule, and she tried to figure out the best way for doing that. Another thing that Emma told me was that one day she was in a meeting with a specific team. They were trying to solve a specific problem. I don't remember on top of my head what was the problem. But there was a junior developer, and that was just suggesting one thing that was completely different from what Emma and the senior developers, the tech leads, were thinking. And when they analyzed that, they discovered that that was the right suggestion. That was the right path to follow for the specific problem. And that struck me at the time, because if you think about that, when you have like junior developers, first of all, it's very rare that you have like the whole team for each single meeting. But secondly, having a person that is suggesting, that is listening, and is trying to, let's say, suggest a potential solution that could be embraced by the team is even more powerful, because it means that it doesn't matter which is the job title. If you have an idea, it's correct that you share it. Emma listened a lot to this, and she had a lot of good insight from the teams. And she wasn't afraid to change her mind. It doesn't matter she was a solution architect. It doesn't matter she was leading technically that specific project. The reality is she wants to create the best business value possible. That it wasn't just the business value for the final user, but also for the developers that she was working with. One day, though, Emma called me, and she was quite pissed off because the project was meant to stand for a couple of years, but unfortunately the business had a different priority. So after a few months, it was roughly 6 months if I remember well, the business said in 3 months you need to deliver something, and there is no possibility for us that we can invest. We need to go out with this new software. She was really pissed off, and I started to coach her on the phone, trying to say, listen, Emma, but did you think about this? Did you think about that? At some point, she hung up the phone, and I didn't hear from her for a week. I was quite surprised, honestly. She wasn't like a behavior that she was used to do. But Emma, at that time, she started to take the missing part of this architecture. She broke up the architecture in small parts, and she started to focus on what really matters for the business. She went in a business meeting with the product owners and explained what was her vision. A product owner listened to her, and at the end, the result was great. She found some trade-off, and they released on time not all the features, just part of them, the ones that were creating real business value for the project. But in that case, Emma did a great job for that project, because if you think about that, she first created a great collaboration within teams, and she was really listening to them, and she created like a great atmosphere for all the teams. It's true, she applied some rules that you cannot find on the books, but in certain contexts are really the only way that you can do. Because on the books, yes, they are trying to provide you, let's say, a path. That doesn't mean that this is always the right path. We need to understand deeply where we are applying those rules. And last but not least, she was successfully delivering a project. Despite that wasn't with all the features, she really created value for the company. That's great. The last story, I like to call them Never Give Up. And it's the one that I really like to tell, and it's a pretty great story. I hope that you will enjoy. So the protagonist is Jack. Jack is a senior software developer. We worked together in the past. And I clearly remember when he joined the company, and he was quite disorientated. He didn't know where the kitchen was, and he was really shy, didn't interact with people. He was, let's say, quite funny to see from the outside, if you want. He was working in this company, and the department that he was working with me, we were roughly 100 people. It's a lot of people to work in different things, and we were working on games, small games, precisely. So the business at that time did a 2 years investment on a specific in-house framework, and this in-house framework, was a bit problematic because yes, they spend and invest a lot of pounds for achieving that, but the performances, in particular on the first version of iPad and iPhone and Android, weren't that great. And a lot of time, developers, they were trying to find shortcuts for delivering specific features. That was exactly against what the architect was thinking about. And I remember one day that Jack came to me and he said, listen, Luca, I think we are a bit screwed here because a lot of people are pissed off with that. They feel really powerless and they don't see how they can contribute, how they can change the situation. Imagine working with 100 developers in an open space. It's not an easy one. But anyway, Jack spent a couple of weeks more to understand how the things were going. And one day, we were used to take coffee together in the morning, not every time, but sometimes, yes, it happened. And it basically came to me with an iPad and an iPhone and said, OK, Jack, what's going on here? And it showed me some features that usually we struggle to have with this specific framework written in other technologies. And they were working like a charm. They were super sleek. It was just amazing looking at this. So when I saw that and he saw my excitement, he was over the moon. So what we did is organizing a meeting with the architect. So let's try to change one thing. So we organized this meeting with the architect. And really, the first impression for the architect, he was astonished. He didn't believe that we were capable with different technologies to achieve that. And Jack was really proud of himself. He should have been, honestly. And I remember clearly what the architect said at the time. He said, yes, that is a great solution, Jack. But in reality, there is no way we can change the status quo because the company invested millions of pounds behind that technology. And it's not an easy thing to do. So basically, killed at the beginning the Jack's idea. And it was a shame. Honestly, I was a bit sad for him, but it was absolutely a stunning result that Jack achieved. A few weeks later, I was talking with Jack, and he told me that he had found a way. So talking with his line manager, he was able to arrange a meeting with the CTO. Jack was still in probation at the time, so he could be fired, being fired at any given point. But Jack didn't care. Jack was convinced that that was the solution for all the problems on that department. So what he did, he went to this presentation. He showed me, he did like a dry run of the presentation. He showed me what he prepared and prepared tons of, let's say, data and performances measurement between the whole world and what he was proposing. And the results were really, really great. Honestly, I don't know what happened in that meeting, but what I know is that I was walking a week later, and I was asking one thing to the architect. And I saw the architect was implementing a weird game. I never saw that game. I never heard about that game. And then I was seeing that he was almost copying the, let's say, implementation from another file. And that file wasn't the technology we were using in the game. It was quite odd, honestly. But yeah, fine. A few weeks later, what happened is we were gathered in a room, hundreds of people inside a huge room. And there was the CTO, there was the architect, and all of us. And they said that they have to make an announcement, that the atmosphere was vibrant at that time. It was really great, honestly. And I didn't know, no one knows what was happening. The thing is, at that time, they started a discussion, and the CTO started saying, guys, you know what? From now on, we are changing priorities. There is a new program that we want to roll out in the next few months. And when he was saying that, I was looking at Jack, and he was nodding to me. And I said, oh, fact, he did it. So at the end, when we finished this thing, this massive meeting, we started to work on the new technology. We started to embrace and research on new technologies. And it was just great. You know, we completely changed the status quo, and Jack arrived to the company. He was still in probation at the time. He was promoted. But he used one of the most powerful things that you can use in order to convince business people. It's called data. Sometimes, probably too often, I saw a lot of hunches made by developers, made by great people, but Jack did something amazing. Jack not only followed his ideas, but also proved with objectiveness that you cannot say, no, it's not true. So the game, I remember clearly, when I was running on Jack implementation and with the whole framework, was roughly 140 times faster on an iPad 1. And that for the business was great. What was the outcome a few months later when we saw that is that the company, so the department where we were working was doing 80% of the revenue for the entire company. So with Jack implementation, we moved from delivering a mini game from 7 to 9 months to 3-4 months. So we can develop way more games. We had developed all these games in devices before we were able to deliver. And overall, the morale for the people was great, because finally, those teams, no one could impose them what was the right technology to use. They can pick between the choices that were suggested by Jack. That was just great, because people found, finally, a way to, let's say, improve themselves and their skills. They were working with the latest technologies, and they were really smashed during the day, because they became way more productive than before, considering they were very happy about the decision. Obviously, Jack had the promotion, he became tech lead, and I'm really glad, honestly, that I had the opportunity to work with Jack. So what we have learned here with these 3 stories. The first insight is that an idea could be more powerful than a job title. And I truly believe about that, because the reality, yes, there are sometimes some hierarchies and are inevitable in any company. But the reality is that everyone should have a say, and you shouldn't be afraid to share that thing. Data are definitely better than gut feelings. If you have an idea, always back it up with data, because those things are definitely more, let's say, easy to be digested by business people that potentially could take some decisions. The other thing is, don't be afraid to work outside your comfort zone. I know that sometimes, you know, we are people that we like to stay in our comfort zone, but working outside that, you will find a solution. You will definitely find a solution for solving the problem, because creativity will help you to achieve that. And don't be afraid to be in that spot, despite that it's not a very comfortable one at the beginning. The other thing is, own technical concept over frameworks. Very often, I see a huge effort on learning deeply a framework, but without understanding what the framework is leveraging behind the scene. And the reality is, if you own the technical concept, it doesn't matter anymore a framework, because at the end, it's just a tool to express yourself, to express your intentions. And that's the key thing. The last but not least, learn from others, but give back to the community. Because the fact that you are giving back, trust me, it would be very helpful, not only for your career, but also for learning things. Because when you explain something to someone, you really need to have clear in your head. And sometimes, yes, you could have worked for hours and days and weeks on a specific thing. But trust me, explaining to someone else is a completely different story. So we have seen so far a lot of stories, 3 actually, with Emma, Jack, and Alex. But there are many other stories out there. There are stories where there were some failures. I just described some of them where there was a partial failure, but then they recovered quickly because they found a way to overcome these failures. But failure often is a bad word. It's a bad way to, I failed. But in reality, it's not. If you think about failure, it's composed by three phases. One is the initial assumption. One is the action that is making the initial assumption. And one is the outcome. You jump straight to the outcome, but the reality is you just learn something. It's nothing more. Failure is just a way to learn that some assumptions weren't right. It's not something bad. Therefore, fail, but fail fast. Because when you fail fast, you can recover, and your chunk of work that you have delivered at that time is not that huge that you cannot change path. You can change path when you want. I would like to close this talk with a life quote that when there are hard times, I tend to stick in my head. And it's coming from Confucius. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And that's the reality. There are a lot of challenges out there, and I know that not all of them are easy to overcome. But the reality is we need to try, and we need to move the first step towards the final goal. And it's not always easy. And yes, you will fail during that journey, but it's not a problem. What I would like really for you is that Monday when you come back to your company, from this talk, you will take maybe one part of the story, maybe one learning. And what I would really like is that don't be afraid to have an impact, because for sure, it will help you yourself, your career, and your company. Thank you very much.